Well, good morning, good morning, good morning, Barry Jones, SP History. We have been continuing with our series in the deep state. And if you remember, I defined the deep state as the national security apparatus and all the industries that feed it. This is mainly during the era of the Cold War. So far, and of course, the CIA is a central component of the national security apparatus. All of the intelligence agencies are, so I would include the FBI in that. So what we've been looking at are a series of covert operations. First, the passing of the law, the National Security Act of 47, which created the CIA, which on its face was created to collect, analyze, and report intelligence to the president. That was what the American public knew of the bill. Then there was a classified part of the bill which created a secret, super secret subcommittee called the 5412 Committee. It's called 5412 because it was in section 5412 of the law, the bill. That committee was chaired by whomever the vice president was at the time, and it gave covert operational capability to the CIA. It was all off the books. The budget was off the books. The fact that it even existed was off the books. Its operations were off the books. All the operators were off the books. Everything was off the books. And the only rationale or pretext needed for any of these covert operations was to say that you were trying to fight the spread of communism. And looking back, the era during which the covert operations of the CIA went big time was during the era of the Eisenhower administration, the 50s. And of course, the vice president chairing the 5412 committee during that time was Richard Nixon. Today, we're going to be getting into a very little known, very few people know this operation because it was even more super secret than the 5412 committee. In other words, it was between Nixon and whomever he wanted it to be between. He went off the books even more so to create an operation that eventually will result in the death of John F. Kennedy in 1963. But before we get to that, I just want to quick take inventory of all the operations we've covered so far. Most of these being in the 50s under the jurisdiction of Nixon and Eisenhower, but some before, like in 46, Operation Paperclip. This was really the brainchild of Alan and John Foster Dulles, the Dulles brothers. And that started in 46, bringing all these Nazis to America for different benefits they would bring to not just intelligence, but also to the national security apparatus and to science, the space industry, medicine, et cetera, et cetera. So that was Operation Paperclip. Between the years 48 and 63, we talked about the CIA literally governing Italy through its proxy, uh, helping defeat the communist socialists in the 1948 election, and then for the next 15 years, funding their hand-picked puppet government, the Christian Democrats, to the tune of $5 million a year. This is the beginning of the CIA understanding its capabilities with respect to the supervision or jurisdiction over foreign governments. And then we got in 1950 into Operation Bluebird, which is the application of Operation Paperclip, where you take those Nazis who have been conducting all these terrible medical experiments on poor Jewish, mostly Jewish concentration camp victims. And now you give them a fresh batch of victims upon whom they can conduct their I hesitate to use the word science, but their research. And this happens to be in North Korea. North Korean POWs were involved in a war with North Korea. And this is called Operation Bluebird. And of course, this will transition into another operation called MK Ultra here at home. 1953, Operation Ajax was the overthrow of Iran on behalf of the oil companies here in America. And 1953 through 73 was the heretofore mentioned Project MK which again is part of Bluebird, kind of an outgrowth of Bluebird. It's a mind control operation that Dulles thought would be the ultimate weapon in the covert war against the Soviets. They even added the word ultra. That was Dulles's contribution to the operational name. MK comes from the German words mind control, which is how the Germans referred to this program when they were operating back in Nazi Germany. So it was a blending of Nazi science and American intelligence. And of course, Sidney Gottlieb was put in charge by Dulles. I went through a whole litany of descriptions of this program, including the Phoenix program, which was an offshoot. This was the CIA targeting non-combatant civilians in Vietnam, labeling them as collaborators, which was the pretext. If you're collaborating with the communists, you are essentially a communist, which was the pretext to put them in prison and then use them as a fresh batch of test victims for the research. Ultimately, we killed over 40,000 South Vietnamese this way in this research. Then when the Vietnam War ended, we had to bring the project home. And now the test subjects are going to be found on college campuses, university campuses, hospitals, prisons, even within our own military. And I gave you some case-by-case examples of different individuals whom we believe, the American public, were taught these are notorious criminals. They weren't always notorious criminals. We broke their brains through MK Ultra and created the criminal that was Whitey Bulger, created the criminal that was Ted Kaczynski, even created the criminal mastermind that was Charles Manson, and then created a couple patsies for other operations named Jack Ruby and Sirhan Sirhan. These are all victims of Project MK Ultra. And it's not it's a controversial program, but it's not a controversial. It's the information is not up for dispute. It's all documented. In fact, the CIA's had to pay damages on several occasions to families whose sons went away to college perfectly normal and then were recruited or steered into these programs to their advisors who worked with the CIA. And next thing they know, their brains have been broken. And they took them to court. The CIA, as a result of document dumps to the family jewels and the church hearings, had to acknowledge the existence of the program and the fact that it was responsible for these victims and had to pay damages. And I told you the story of John Mulholland, which was part of Project MK Ultra. Now, this was not the reason I included this was not because of the so-called terribleness of the program itself, but it's important to understand where the sleight of hand, diversion, distraction, all these methods the CIA will employ going forward, where they came from. They were actually taught to the CIA. Dulles recruited this guy. He was the most famous American magician to teach his agents how to use these magic tricks to fool people's eyes. And of course, he came from the right family stock. He was part of that deep state as far as its family history and his connections were concerned. And he produced a manual of trickery and deception. And this is what the CIA used to train its agents. And the art of diversion is the primary purpose I brought him into this discussion, is because they will learn from John Mulholland how to trick witnesses' eyes and ears into thinking that patsies who have been set up in advance are the actual perpetrators of these so-called domestic operations. And when they are called to testify, they will, not realizing that they are the subject or the victim of a trick, will say what they saw and say what they heard, which will fall right in line with what the narrative, the government narrative is. So, for example, the use of a patsy becomes a common ploy going forward, setting someone up in advance to be seen or to be heard by the witnesses while the kill shot comes from another location. This is all planned. This is not, these are not mistakes. These are not things that, just coincidentally happen by, there's an act of, sort of randomness. These are planned in advance and they were taught as part of the CIA manual. Anyway, so we talked about Mulholland. And then 54, we talked about the operation in Guatemala, PB success, which again, like Iran, is another government overthrow for the purposes of helping U.S. companies, in this case, United Fruit, which wanted continuing access to all the resources, the land, etc. And the Arbenz was proving to be troublesome for them. So they went to their contacts in intelligence and the Pentagon and government, and they got the operation. And of course, the American people were spoon-fed a story that Arbenz was a communist. We also have included in this discussion so far the inclusion of 3 different reports whereby folks were warned in advance or during all this time that the CIA had gone rogue. And these were pretty exhaustive reports. The Doolittle Report 54 was the first, which called the CIA, which has only been in existence 7 years by this point. It's already, quote, badly managed and unaccountable. It's already a rogue elephant. And they classified Dulles, who's been appointed leader of the CIA directorate by President Eisenhower, as overly zealous. There'll be 2 other reports we'll get to in a second. The Phoenix Project continued after the Vietnam War with or during the Vietnam War. It had another offshoot aspect to it, in addition to the research, the medical research, which created 40,000 South Vietnamese victims, whereby the CIA virtually assassinated them through this research. It also was a fundraising program for these covert ops. A lot of heroin came out of this region, the Golden Triangle, Southeast Asia. And because we were there, we took over this heroin trafficking, the CIA did, funneling it into our proxy in Cuba under our puppet dictator, Batista. And in exchange for payoffs to Batista helped us process all this heroin and then eventually smuggle it into America. This is called the French Connection. And the CIA would target inner cities of the United States. And that's a whole nother discussion, which gets into raising money, but also carrying out a program of depopulation simultaneous. So this was a way to create a slush fund, so to speak, a covert source of money for all these covert operations so that no one would ever be the wiser. And then and in so doing also carry out another policy, which, as I said, was depopulation. So it was a win-win-win for the CIA. Here's the second report we talked about, Bruce Lovett, which said by now in 56, just 2 years after the Doolittle report, it says the CIA has become an overseas kingmaker because by this time they've seen what happened in Iran, Italy, and Guatemala. And they said that the CIA had promiscuous freedom, went around barging into other people's business, other countries, etc. In 56, it was another foreign intervention, this time in Dominican Republic. This is when we introduced a policy the CIA called extraordinary rendition, whereby in order to have plausible deniability, the CIA actually uh, captures the target. Instead of killing him or her itself, they hand this person over to his or her enemies who carry out the murder for the CIA. Uh, this murder would not have happened without the efforts of the CIA. And you're going to see this time and time again through the 50s as we go forward. So in this case, it was Jesus de Galindez who was boiled alive, and then his pilot, Gerald Murphy, who was thrown into what they called a swimming pool, the area in the ocean where all the sharks congregated. So he was fed to the sharks. This is uh, because our uh, puppet regime down there complained. Trujillo complained to the Americans that this guy is criticizing me. I don't like him. I'd like to get rid of him. And so we did the dirty work for him and handed him over, and then Trujillo did the rest. Then 57, we got into the the second domestic operation. The first one was MK Ultra, which, of course, remember now, the charter of the CIA was not supposed to operate domestically. So we've already established that the CIA is breaking the law, operating domestically through MK Ultra. Now we see again another case where it is operating domestically in Operation Mockingbird, where it is targeting media and history and books, publishing companies and Hollywood, etc., and subverting the information the American people are receiving, propagandizing the American people, either by uh, making up, feeding the American people misinformation or disinformation, or withholding information altogether. Um, and we went through the flow chart of power, the hierarchy. Dulles was at the top. He appointed Frank Wisner to be in charge. Frank Wisner picked Gordon Meyer to carry out much of the day-to-day responsibilities. I showed you how this operation, which to this day is the only operation, so far as we know, that never had a termination date, continues to this day. And I showed you how prominent intelligence, members of intelligence, continue to this day to be called experts and brought in by major media companies to pontificate on news programs to the American people, their version of events. This continues to this day. I gave you names of people that were on the payroll. I gave you companies that were controlled by the CIA. These are newspapers, wire agencies. These are Hollywood productions, companies like Howard Hughes, RKO Pictures, and then I talked about the trick that they use to be able to plausibly deny. This is one of the CIA's uh, modus operandi. They're always looking for plausible deniability. And the way by which they go about this is that they feed this information to their foreign assets, whom they also control, just like they do their domestic assets. The foreign assets publish uh, the material, and then the domestic news organizations pick up the story and report it here. And if you're following the flow of the information, it starts off classified from CIA, who give it to their foreign news sources or writers who write books or whatever. And then they, of course, they're going to keep their sources confidential. They report the story. And then our news organizations are just reprinting what has already been printed in foreign newspapers or other media outlets. And so the CIA comes out of this whole thing unscathed. Like they don't have their hands dirty, but it all originated with them. And I gave you even a recent example where that happened in the Russia gate uh, hoax against Trump. If you go back and you find out where a lot of this started, it started in England. And there were these foreign sources that were working together with American intelligence to print these stories that get into the bloodstream and are reprinted in America, which causes FBI to now want to sniff around and open investigations based on the published information. And it's all leaked from American intelligence, laundered through foreign news sources, reprinted by American news sources, picked up by FBI here at home to begin investigations. That's their trick. And so it's continuing to this day. Uh, anyway, so that was Operation Mockingbird. And of course, Frank Church was able to identify over 50 U.S. journalists who were employed directly by the agency during this period. But then he said there was a lot more that there wasn't, that had a relationship with the CIA, that may not have been employed directly by the CIA, but they were influenced. And the CIA was paying regularly for their services, and they would get occasional gifts and reimbursements. And they were effectively assets. They weren't direct agents, but they were assets. Anyway, the point is, we don't know how big this was. We just know it was big. And they even had operations that were under the direction of an officer, E. Howard Hunt, we're going to talk about later, who arranged, he was an author himself. He wrote a bunch of spy novels. And it was his responsibility to arrange for book reviews of any book that had anything to do with intelligence or covered topics that the CIA might be interested in, and to arrange for negative or hostile reviews of books that were, uh, hostile to the CIA in any way, shape, or form, and good reviews, positive reviews of the ones who reaffirm the narrative. Really calls into question a lot of the literature out there about it. For example, the JFK assassination. There are so many books, so many. And you start to wonder how many of these books were either CIA assets, I mean, paid directly by the CIA to print these books, to publish these books, or they were influenced in other ways, or the review process doomed some to very low circulation while promoting others to be sort of the books of record. And it really calls into question everything we know about, at least from these authors is concerned, about the JFK assassination. When you find out that the CIA, who turns out, according to a court of law in the Marina Lorenz case, to be responsible for the assassination of JFK, and its former director basically ran the investigation, the Warren Commission, and now is literally in charge of crafting all of the narrative the American people will ever learn about the assassination itself, exempting itself, of course, and again, to the art of diversion, pointing the finger of blame always away from itself towards a patsy. It's unbelievable. And of course, nowadays it's even more in your face because of the presence of social media. And I gave you article after article examples of how intelligence officials control Twitter, Google, Facebook, all of these different, Google owns YouTube, for example, all these different media platforms that the American people now get most of their news information from. Then we got into Operation 40. This was the operation to overthrow and or kill Fidel Castro. And I gave you the flow chart there. Alan Dulles is at the top. He appointed his deputy, Charles Cabal, to run the day-to-day. He brought in Bill Harvey. You see Bill Harvey's name on anything, there's an assassination part to this operation. And James Angleton was counterintelligence. He's going to be very useful going forward in setting up a patsy in one of its biggest operations. David Atlee Phillips, of course, because he's the CIA chief of the Western Hemisphere. He's going to be involved in this operation. And I told you what it was. Mainly, it was saboteurs. And the thinking was, if you can create hell on earth for the Cuban people, they'll blame the new leader and overthrow him themselves. And again, the CIA has plausible deniability. This is the third report. So we've got to the Doolittle and the Bruce Lovett, both of which have castigated the CIA as a rogue elephant, and the president's own board of consultants. This is under Eisenhower, reported in 1960 that the CIA should, quote, de-emphasize the cloak and dagger adventures. In other words, get rid of all the covert operations and just get back to its main purpose, which was to collect, analyze, and report intelligence. And then when Eisenhower famously heard the conclusions of this report, read them for himself, he said, quote, "I've tried, but I can't change Allen Dulles." So in Ike's own words, Allen Dulles has become ungovernable. He's become unaccountable. If the president who appointed him to that position and is his boss, technically, can't control him, then you've got, by definition, a rogue elephant in charge of a rogue agency. Is there any question or any wonder why the CIA would engage in some of the behaviors it's been engaged in when it's run by this guy? And part of Operation 40, in our last episode, I told you the story of Marita Lorenz. And this is important because I wanted to show that they always say, well, if this was a conspiracy, if the JFK assassination was a conspiracy, somebody would have talked. And I always get frustrated when I hear people say that because many, many people talked. Many people talked. Now, a lot of them ended up dead. Many more would have talked if they weren't afraid of ending up dead. And the ones who did talk either got smeared or their information got buried or lost or ignored. So much so that a first-hand telling of the events leading up to 63, the assassination, somebody who was on the inside and has no axe to grind, no motive to lie, goes before a jury. We never had a trial in the JFK assassination because Oswald, the perp, so-called, was killed. So there's no trial. The only trial was Ruby, and that was rigged. Trials are unpredictable, but we did have a civil trial of of the Liberty Lobby situation, the news organization that accused the CIA and E. Howard Hunt specifically of being involved in the assassination. They charged him with libel, sued him for libel, and they won a big settlement. And in the appeal, the attorney, Mark Lane, found Marita Lorenz, and I told the story. She's the star witness. She tells this unbelievable story, naming names, and of course, incriminating herself along the way, which tends to lend credibility to the story. And of course, as she names these names and tells of places that she's been, people she was with, events that she witnessed, she was part of, you start putting puzzle pieces together, especially if you've done research of this. And you've researched E. Howard Hunt, you've researched the CIA or Frank Sturgis or, uh, you know, all these different people. You realize she's telling the truth. And it's not just me saying that. The jury who heard the story, heard her tell the story under oath, believed her and reversed the case and found that Marita was indeed part of Operation 40. She'd been recruited into it by Frank Sturgis, and as such, worked as an Operation 40 asset for the CIA during this period of time, and was in direct contact with E. Howard Hunt during this period, witnessing E. Howard Hunt pay for Frank Sturgis multiple times for different operations they were involved in. And how she was actually recruited to try to assassinate Castro because she had an affair with him. She could get close to him. How she chickened out and couldn't go through with it. And that resulted in Bay of Pigs. And of course, eventually, when Bay of Pigs failed and everyone in the national security apparatus that was so gung-ho to get rid of Castro realized that Kennedy was now the problem, they switched targets, deciding we're going to take out Kennedy now instead of Castro. If we're ever going to get Castro, we're going to have to take Kennedy out first. And of course, in her testimony, she even made mention of the fact that she was at a Operation 40 training base along with somebody who was claiming to be Lee Harvey Oswald. She was there with Sturgis, and there's a picture down there of the far right circle is her, and E. Howard Hunt was there. He's the middle guy. Sturgis is the guy in the hat, and then a guy claiming to be Lee Harvey Oswald. Now, You say, well, who was that? Well, there are all sorts of doppelgangers by this point. This is 63. And by this point, he is being set up as a patsy. But this goes back prior to 63. In fact, we have on record a memo from FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover in 1960 claiming that while Lee Harvey Oswald, the real Oswald, is in Russia, uh, carrying out a fake defector operation with the CIA, somebody is in Florida and different places in the South masquerading or pretending to be Lee Harvey Oswald, signing his name on documents. And he is alerting people under his purview to keep an eye out for these people that are claiming to be Lee Harvey Oswald in 1960 while the real Oswald is in Russia. So this is an ongoing thing that has been happening, uh, as far as we know, back to 1960, according to the documented memo that J. Edgar Hoover sent down the pipeline, the FBI. This isn't anything new, is my point. And the reason we know that this is an imposter is because he's too tall. Oswald was himself, the real Oswald, was not that tall. Anyway, she tells the story about how one day she's there's this meeting. It's her and it's Sturgis and it's Orlando Bosch and it's Pedro Diaz-Lanz. These are Operation 40 guys, and they're meeting and they're spreading Dallas street maps on the table. They're talking about an operation, a big operation that's going to involve gun running. And of course, she was involved in gun running. And so they took this 1,300-mile trip. Took about 2 days to get there. And as far as she knew at the time, it was just going to be drop off guns, which she was a little bit confused about. Why are we taking guns to Dallas? Usually they're bringing guns from Dallas to Miami. Miami is where they all end up. Why are we taking them to Dallas? And when she got there, she witnessed Sturgis and E. Howard Hunt in the Dallas motel room. They're exchanging money for weapons, etc. And then Jack Ruby comes to the door and gets all upset with E. Howard Hunt. Why is this woman here? And in normal gun running operations, her presence wouldn't have been remarkable at all, wouldn't have caused any kind of hubbub. But in this operation, he was really agitated that she was even there. And that alerted her to the idea that this might be more than just gun running. And so she went to Sturgis and asked to get out. She wanted to go home. She wanted to go back to Miami. So Sturgis put her on her plane. The next day, that was on November 22 or 21st when she told Sturgis first. On November 22 that morning, she flies out and goes to Miami. That very same day, that afternoon, Kennedy's assassinated. And she realizes that's what the operation was. So she goes to the FBI. The FBI says, well, that was CIA activity. It's not FBI, so we don't care. So even in the FBI's own words to Marita Lorenz, they recognized immediately who was behind everything in Dallas. It was the CIA. They just didn't want to investigate it. So later, she gets a phone call from Sturgis, and Sturgis tells her, listen, you could have been with us and made history that day. We killed the president that day. And he brags about how it was safe. Everything was covered in advance, no arrests, no newspaper investigation. It was all covered, very professional. And that's the story she tells on stand. And the jury's sitting here hearing this. And the defense has no defense for this story. And as a result, the jury finds for the defendant Liberty Lobby against the plaintiff, E. Howard Hunt, and his boss or his employer, the CIA. And when asked, the jury foreperson Leslie Armstrong later said, quote, the evidence clearly demonstrated that Hunt and the CIA assassinated President Kennedy. I wanted to tell this story for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's another one of the covert operations that's taking place, and it's happening on domestic soil. So we know it's documented. It's been proven now in a court of law, right? And it's shows that the CIA again is breaking the law by operating domestically. This is the third such case we've covered: MK Ultra, Mockingbird, and now this situation in Dallas. Not supposed to be operating domestically at all. And Hunt, who for years, from 63 on, he was accused of being, witnesses said they saw him in Dallas. Marie Lorenz said she saw him in Dallas. So from 63 to 2007, but you're talking about 37 plus 7, so 44 years. For 44 years, Hunt denies that he was ever in Dallas. Now, when Watergate happens in the 70s, the CIA, Hunt was one of the 7 men arrested at the burglary. And because of his, he has no plausible deniability when it comes to Watergate. He's in neck deep in Watergate. And because the CIA does not want to have one of its agents caught up in the Watergate mess, they cut him loose. And there's a famous memo circulating in the CIA or from the CIA saying, someday we're going to have to cut this guy loose. Or at some point, if we allow this investigation to fester, at some point, someone's going to get wise to the fact that he was in Dallas in 1963. And we can take the hit for Watergate, say we had a rogue agent, and we're going to cut him loose. We can't take the hit for the JFK assassination. So, but even with that, the CIA cutting him loose, he still denied it up until his deathbed confession. Finally, in 2007, he admitted it. And more than admitted it, he named names himself. So it turns out there's multiple ways to corroborate Marie Lorenz's story, including from the man himself on his deathbed. And this is a picture of him on his deathbed as he's speaking to the media and telling his story. So that brings us, that's what we've covered so far about the CIA and its covert capabilities. And we've established, it's part of the deep state because it is a national security or the apparatus. And it includes the FBI. We've already seen several cases where the FBI is complicit in all this as well. We've established it's part of the national security apparatus. We've also established that it's got this covert capability as a result of the 5412 committee. We've also established that it has, even though the law says it's not allowed to operate domestically, it is from its very beginning operating domestically. And we've also established that in a court of law, a jury has determined that it was culpable in the assassination of an American president. We've already seen that they've taken out foreign governments. So what would be their compunction? What would be their objection to doing that here at home as well? We haven't gotten the motive and all that kind of stuff yet, but I'm just laying the groundwork so you can see that when we get to all the motive, when we get to all the operators that were in Dallas that day, CIA operators, that you can see a pattern and understand clearly that they were the movers and shakers in what happened in Dallas in 1963. And today's story is going to be further evidence of that. This is the story of the chairman of the 5412 committee during the 50s, otherwise known as the vice president of the United States. That's Richard Nixon. And again, it's having to do with Cuba. In 1960, we've got an upcoming election in November of 60. And of course, Nixon is the presumptive Republican nominee as the vice president for a very popular Republican president, Eisenhower. And he's been on the scene for a long time as a senator and now 8 years as a vice president. He's got all the anti-communist bona fides that everybody's looking for during this period. He's got the experience factor. He's running against JFK, who becomes the Democrat nominee. And if the betting odds in June, at least, in 1960, was that Nixon was going to wipe the floor with JFK. JFK was young, inexperienced. He was a Northeastern liberal, which was going to be hard to draw votes from the South. He had a criminal father, bootlegger, not helpful at all, at least legitimately helpful, but certainly illegitimately, he was very helpful. There's just a lot of things. He was a war hero himself. Both had served in the military. He had assets as well. But uh, in the head-to-head, most people, if they were betting, would have said that Nixon was going to win. And when Nelson Rockefeller withdrew from the race in the Republican primary in June of '60, that established Nixon as the presumptive Republican nominee. And so Nixon, looking for an edge to win the election against JFK in November, makes an off the books phone call. Now, I'll start off by saying the first question you're probably going to be asking is, well, where are you getting this information? And I'll start off by saying that I will tell you when we get to the end where this information came from and how we got access to it. But I'll give you a little clue. Watergate was huge in this, was sort of like the key to unlocking certainly what happened in Watergate, but also what happened starting with this phone call all the way back in June of 1960, because there's a connection. And the man who knows this story is still alive, and he I've spoken with him. I've had lunch with him and spent hours with him talking about this. And of course, he's told the story. He's written about it. He's one of those witnesses that just happened to be in the right place at the right time by virtue of his occupation. He was a young man at the time, but had access to a lot of things behind the scenes that ultimately became huge events in our nation's history during this period. And I'll introduce you to him. You get to the end today. Um, anyway, this off the books phone call that Nixon made was to a friend of his, a political supporter of his named Howard Hughes. Howard Hughes was sort of like the Elon Musk of his day. He was a billionaire. He was an inventor. He was a pilot. He owned Hollywood studios. We talked about that before. He was a producer of Hollywood. As an inventor and a pilot, and with the money that he had access to high-ranking people in the government, including the National Security Council, because in his days of inventing, he had created something called the Spruce Goose, which became the prototype for the mammoth C-5A cargo plane pictured here below. We still use this plane to this day. It's interesting when he needed a test pilot to fly it, but it was made out of balsa wood, it wasn't even made out of metal or aluminum, and no, everyone was scared to fly it, so he had to test fly it himself. He also owned the Summa Corporation, which built submarine retrieval vehicles for the Pentagon, and did all kinds of research and development work for the National Security Council. So this guy was tied in to the national security apparatus, and he was tied in very tight with Nixon. He'd been a political supporter of Nixon going back. I did a whole series of videos on Nixon and Howard Hughes and their past connections, pretty deep. Anyway, because of his work with the National Security Council, mainly because of his money, they had a close working relationship. It was secret, right? Howard Hughes had he was sort of a eccentric, and so they kept that relationship as off the books as possible. But in one particular case, Hughes had given Nixon a $250,000 personal loan to Nixon's brother, who was trying to create a burger chain out in California called the Nixon Burger, and was losing money hand over fist. Howard Hughes shows up to the rescue. That's not all. That's just one example. There's many. So this is a mover and shaker. He's not a member of the government, but he's a mover and shaker nonetheless. So Nixon calls him and he says, I need you, because I know you can, I need you to assemble a hit team to assassinate Fidel Castro. And I know I need this done before the November election. I need credit for the assassination of Fidel Castro before the people go to the polls. And this Operation 40 that we've been the 5412 committee has been engaged in is not working fast enough. So I need to expedite this process, and I'm going straight to a man who can get the things done. I need you to get this done. And he gives them a target list. He said, I need you to target Fidel and his brother, Raul, and then his other underlings, including Che Guevara and the top 5 other Cuban officials in Castro's government. So it would be a hit list basically of 8 people: Fidel, Raul, Che, plus 5. This operation ends up being a tremendous failure. You know, we failed in assassinating these people, but it succeeds otherwise in another way. So what happens next? So Howard Hughes, you know, when you're a man of means, you don't get your hands dirty yourself. You got people who do that work for you. So he goes to his attorney, Bob Mayhew, and Bob Mayhew, and he basically tells him what Nixon told him on the phone. So he gives Bob Mayhew the assignment. And Mayhew has all kinds of connections. He used to work for the government himself in intelligence, and now he's working for Hughes as his attorney. So he contacts the mob contact who's been sort of acting as the go-between between the mob and the CIA and all their efforts to kill Castro. So he contacts Rosselli and he says, out in Las Vegas, and he says, I need this. I need to recruit a hit team to kill Castro. And he knew that the mob would be hot to trot for this because it wasn't just the U.S. government that wanted Castro dead for political reasons. The CIA wanted him dead too because Castro killed their French connection, their heroin trafficking. And the mafia wanted Castro dead because he's the reason they all got kicked out of Cuba. So there's a lot of reasons here, a lot of motive here for these different entities to collaborate in this operation. Rosselli says, "Well, let's meet and talk about this again." They end up meeting in Las Vegas. They meet in L.A. at the Brown Derby, and at the Brown Derby, Rosselli says, "Okay, well, I can't greenlight this myself. Obviously, I'll take it to my boss." His boss, Sam Giancana, the Chicago crime family. So Rosselli goes to Giancana and tells him all the same. So far, the plan starts with Nixon, a phone call, goes to Howard Hughes, goes to Bob Mayhew, goes to Johnny Rosselli, and now it's gone to Sam Giancana, and they're all sitting around, and Giancana says, "Well, I'm good with it, but this is going to involve a hit in Cuba, and I am not the mob boss of Cuba. Santos Trafficante is. That's his territory. So we're going to have to take this down to Miami and talk to Trafficante and get his sign off on this." So they do. They have a couple meetings. The first meeting, they present Trafficante. Here's pictures of them at this meeting. They present Trafficante at the Fontainebleau Hotel, right down on the beach, down in Miami. Been there. It still looks the same. And Trafficante's like, he's nobody's fool. He says, "Well, you say this is from Nixon, but I'm looking around the table here, and I see Rosselli, he's one of us. I see Mayhew, he might as well be one of us. I see Giancana. I see no Nixon. And I am not going to get hung out to dry on this. You know, if something goes bad, we're going to take the fall for this, unless this is coming from Nixon. But I want proof that it's coming from Nixon." So they set up a second meeting. And this time, Sheffield Edwards, who in the bottom picture here is the guy on the far left leaning in. And they get him. He is the director of the CIA security. He is essentially Richard Nixon. Nixon can't go to this meeting for obvious reasons. He's recognizable, but nobody knows who Sheffield Edwards is. He goes by a nickname, Mr. Ed. And so by sending Sheffield Edwards to the second meeting, now Santos Trafficante is assured that it's confirmation that Nixon's blessing is on this plan. And so they put Santos in charge, since they're getting this hit team's going to have to be all Cubans. They're going to have to be able to infiltrate into Cuba, get close to Castro. It can't be white guys. Can't be guys from Chicago or New York. So they put Santos in charge of recruiting the hit team. And of course, what Santos does smartly is he recruits back his own gunmen that he had loaned to the CIA to carry out Operation 40. He recruits 15 of them back. They're his guys. But now, because they've been working for the CIA for the past however many months or years, they have a dual distinction of having worked for the government. They've been paid by the government. So he knows that if I recruit 15 fresh ones and things go bad, we'll take the fall. They'll be my guys. But if I recruit 15 guys from this Operation 40, which is a CIA operation, and things go bad, the CIA will move heaven and earth to ensure that the identities of these 15 gunmen never become known because they can be traced back to Operation 40, which traces back to the CIA. So he was smart, and he is ensuring essentially CIA cover. That's what he's doing. And he knows these guys. He knows they're the best. They've been working for him before they worked for the CIA. And now he's recruiting the 15 best of them back. And these are the names of the 15. And you say, well, how did you get this list of names? Again, it goes back to my source, which I will reveal at the end here. So you see, these are all Cubans: Rafael Chichi Quintero, Felix Rodriguez, Rolando Martinez, Paul Jorge, Rafael Bilavardi, Eladio Del Val, Ricardo Chabana. And you notice when you get to the bottom, there's 3 names there that are highlighted in yellow: Bernard Barker, Eugenio Martinez, Virgilio Gonzalez. I highlighted these because this is July 1960 when they're getting recruited. But in 1972, when Watergate happens, these 3 are 3 of the burglars that get arrested at the Watergate Hotel. Same guys. So instantly we have a connection here between an assassination team being recruited in 1960 to kill Castro and the Watergate break-in that happens 12 years later in Washington, D.C. Uh-oh. Maybe you see where I'm going with this. According to the source, there's 2 sources that I'm going to give you when we get to the end of this. The S force is divided up into groups of 3. So there's 15, so you have 5 groups, and they're spread out among the 5 Operation 40 training bases, which we already know. There was a training base off the east coast of Florida called Swan Island. There was a training base in the Everglades, which we know because Marie Lorenz told us the story. She went to the Everglades base and saw the CIA liaison who was in charge of that base, E. Howard Hunt. That was when that man masquerading as Lee Harvey Oswald was there. That's when they were there with Frank Sturgis, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, that was overseen by E. Howard Hunt, Everglades. There's another base, No Name Key, which is run by CIA liaison Frank Sturgis, which is the guy who recruited Marie Lorenz into the Operation 40. There's 2 bases in New Orleans, both on Lake Pontchartrain, one on the north and one on the south. The one in the north is famously the one that Oswald was frequented that base to help train these Cuban nationals. David Ferry, Guy Bannister, Clay Shaw, David Atlee Phillips. These guys were all frequent visitors to this base, according to many witnesses. Those are names that, if you're familiar with the JFK research, you should recognize all those names. If you're not, they might not. Maybe Oswald's the only one you recognize. But anyway, so you got these 5 bases, and they've spread out these 15 to hide them basically in plain sight, but to not have them as one group. And interestingly, I'm going to draw another connection here to Watergate. So far, the names that I've given you are 3 names from the 15. Here, I go back, these 3, and I've given you these 2, all the ones highlighted. So Bernard Barker, Martinez, and Gonzalez, 3 of the burglars later, or 3 of the assassins recruited into this assassination team. Also, 3 of the burglars, Watergate, 12 years later. And 2 of the CIA guys in charge of supervising these assassins, E. Howard Hunt, Frank Sturgis, also arrested at Watergate 12 years later. So if you look at the highlighted names here in 1972, Watergate, You have 5 names that were affiliated with this assassination team back in 1960. E. Howard Hunt, Bernard Barker, Eugenio Martinez, Virgilio Gonzalez, and Frank Sturgis, that were all part of an assassination team in 1960 and part of a Watergate operation gone bad in 1972. So you see there's instantly a connection between what happened, what's going on in 1960 and what happened in 1972. Now, the only 2 names there that I put stars next to that are not highlighted, James McCord, G. Gordon Liddy, they were not connected to the assassination team, but they have their own connections. G. Gordon Liddy to the FBI, he's ex-FBI, and James McCord to the CIA. He was a CIA agent at the time he was arrested, which should give you a huge, as was E. Howard Hunt, as was Frank Sturgis, as were all these guys, which should give you a big clue as to who was behind Watergate. Anyway, just thought I'd show you that. Meanwhile, still in the month of July, as this assassination team is being recruited, the 2 presidential candidates are getting their presidential briefings from the CIA. This is something that is afforded to the 2 main candidates by the time they've gone through the nomination process. And the CIA, which basically owns and controls Richard Nixon at this point. I mean, Nixon's been in control of all these covert operations since 52. The CIA and Nixon are as thick as thieves by this point, and the CIA's interested in finding out what they can get away with the other candidate, what they can, they can't fool Nixon with anything. Nixon knows everything. The question is, what does Kennedy know? So they spoon-fed Kennedy a deliberate lie, telling the candidate that the United States had fallen behind the Soviets in missile production. They call it the missile gap. And when Kennedy went out and started repeating the lie, unwittingly, he thought he'd been told the truth. And he goes out and he starts campaigning on this lie that there's a missile gap. And the American people are looking at Nixon, who's been part of the government for the last 8 years, thinking, how is that possible? Have you been asleep at the switch and allowed the Soviets to build more missiles than us? And of course, because this is classified information, Nixon can't refute it. He can't come out with numbers and say, no, listen, this is how he basically has to just eat it. Meanwhile, Kennedy can make the accusation, but Nixon can't refute it. Kennedy's not revealing any classified information. He's just, because he's not giving out numbers or anything. He's just saying that the Soviets have passed the Americans as far as missile production is concerned, and Nixon can't do anything about it. He's getting killed in the press, and the electorate is looking at him suspiciously, thinking maybe he's gone wobbly against the communists, whatever. But the CIA, having spoon-fed their Kennedy this lie and watched Kennedy go out and dutifully report it to the American people, now know that they can say anything they want to this candidate, and he'll repeat it. He doesn't know what he doesn't know. And that to them represents an opportunity to control a candidate whereby they don't have the same control over Nixon because they can't lie to Nixon. Nixon's one of them. And so their control over Nixon is limited. In fact, he controls them. But now they can control Kennedy because they could lie to him. And then when he finds out the truth, but can't reveal to the American people that he lied and repeated a lie, they've got blackmail compromise on him. So the CIA essentially chooses their candidate through this process. It's about whom can we control. We can't control Nixon. He controls us, but we can control Kennedy. He'll repeat anything we tell him. And they persuade Kennedy that the way to go forward in this war against the Soviets, this Cold War against the Soviets, is not through massive retaliation, which is building all these missiles, technology, and nuclear capabilities, because that's Pentagon. That's outside the bounds of the CIA. It's really about counterinsurgency and unconventional warfare. That's CIA. In other words, what the CIA convinces JFK of is that they, the CIA, should be in charge of Cold War policy, foreign policy, not the Pentagon. That they're the past and the CIA is the future. And this is why JFK, after he does succeed in becoming president, gets in. He's the president that launches the Green Berets, the Special Forces, and a bunch more CIA covert ops. They see in, Nixon has been greenlighting all kinds of covert ops. But with Nixon, he's also been part of the Eisenhower government, which has been going through this massive retaliation, this massive buildup of nuclear missiles, notwithstanding what the CIA said to Kennedy about the missile gap. The Eisenhower government has actually been building missiles at a very fast rate. And that is money and power that is diverted away to the Pentagon that the CIA wanted. And through Kennedy, by supporting Kennedy for president, the CIA was guaranteeing a primary role in the Cold War foreign policy going forward. Of course, a primary role means a lot of money and a lot of power. So they chose their candidate, and the candidate was Kennedy. Meanwhile, that's July of 60. By the time we get to August of 60, the S Force, which has been named, this team of assassins, those 15 that have been recruited, they call them the S Force, named after Santos, because he's the one who picked them, recruited them. Otherwise known by the CIA as the Triangular Fire Team. You'll see why in a minute. But they are doing their training, which of course is off the books, down in Mexico. You say, well, I thought they were spread out, 3 at a base, all these 5 Operation 40 bases. They were. But during times of training, they would be picked up by plane and flown to Mexico. We'll talk about that in just a minute. And to a private location where they would be trained by 2 CIA operatives in the expertise of triangular fire. That's August of 60. That's their first meeting down in Mexico. In September of 60, candidate JFK is briefed the first time about the 5412 committee. So he, up till now, he didn't even know about the CIA's covert capabilities because remember, the 5412 committee was classified. So even the existence of it, now he's finding out about it, and he's finding out that his vice presidential nominee, LBJ, would be in charge of this 5412 committee going forward. And they tell Kennedy about all of these different operations that the 5412 committee has been involved in through the 50s, and including the one that is happening at that time, which is Operation 40. But they do not tell him about the S Force. I mean, that is off the books. They tell him about Operation 40, which is mainly an operation of sabotage and infiltration, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, we get to November of 1966, and the unthinkable happens. Nixon loses, and Kennedy wins. So the CIA is sitting there rubbing their hands together thinking, man, our guy won. And we now have the keys to the kingdom, so to speak. We control this guy. Everything we've told him, he's repeated, whether it's been true or otherwise. Most of it's not been true. And every suggestion we've made, he's followed through on, and he's campaigned on. We control this guy. So they're viewing it as like jackpot. Meanwhile, I told you I'd get back to this these assassins, this S Force. So how you say, well, how did that work? Their training. The pilot. Now, Tosh Plumley was the pilot. I want to go back, see if I can find that picture here of the Operation 40. Remember, he was part of Operation 40 at the beginning. I gave you there he is. All right. So you see where my cursor is? I'm drawing a circle around. He's pulled the He's covering his face with his sport coat. That's Tosh Plumley. This is the original cast of Operation 40 characters, and that's Tosh Plumley. He's a pilot. Another pilot is Barry Seal, which is he's right here, and he's a story for another day. But the one that applies today is Tosh Plumley. That's the guy, and he has been recruited. I'll get back to my PowerPoint here. He has been recruited to transport this S-force around. So he would fly to each of these 5 bases, pick up these 3 S-force members from each base, and then fly the whole team to Fort Huachuca in Arizona. This is an Army and military intelligence base. So this is their base. It's sort of, it's a nondescript location. And it's right down there on the border. They would sign in, each one of these men, these 15 assassins, would sign in, and next to their name, they would sign government employees. So they are working for the government in this capacity. They would get back on the plane and fly across the border into Mexico, down to Clint Murchison Jr.'s ranch down in Mexico to train. Now, Clint Murchison Jr. was a prominent oil man out of Texas. Owned the Dallas Cowboys. And, he was a mover and a shaker. He was a big LBJ supporter. And it was at his ranch where this triangular fire team would train. And the guys that would train them are these 2 fellas. On the left, you see that is Carl Jenkins. On the right, where I'm circling, that is William Rip Robertson. These are CIA officers who trained these assassins in a specialized form of training. What they learned in all their attempts to try to assassinate Castro was we can't get close to the guy. And sometimes we don't even know who he is because he's got so many body doubles. We don't know where he sleeps at night. He's always on the move. We're going to have to get him from distance. And we're going to have to get him between 3 rifles. A triangular hit on a moving target. He's probably going to be in a Jeep or a vehicle, open top, hopefully. And we're going to have him, the target, between 3 teams with high-powered rifles. This is so you're trying to hit a moving target from distance with high-powered rifles, and the target's going to be between 3 teams. That's why they call it the triangular fire team. Now, if you've got your thinking cap on, you're fast forwarding to Dallas. And you're remembering the fact that JFK was hit in the front, the back, and the side. That's all I'll say about that. Anyway, who paid for all this? Remember, all these kinds of operations, the financing is always off the books. And, the CIA, in order to carry out a lot of these covert operations previously, was using its illicit drug trade, the heroin French connection, but now that's been shut down by Castro. So they need an alternate source of funding. And this is where Sam Giancana comes in, the boss up in Chicago. His role to play in this was to skim from 2 of his Las Vegas casinos, the Sands and the Desert, and put that skimmed cash money in the trunks and in suitcases and put in the trunks of brand new Cadillacs that would be driven from Las Vegas to New Orleans, where another crime boss, Carlos Marcello, would add to it their funds, but then also inventory it and send it down to Miami. So it would make its way from Las Vegas through New Orleans, stopping off there for Carlos Marcello to add his contribution and then send it on down to Miami, where it would be deposited at the Miami National Bank, which was owned by Meyerlansky. He's the mob accountant that was very instrumental in creating the National Crime Syndicate, dividing New York into 5 crime families, et cetera, et cetera. He couldn't be a crime boss himself because he was Jewish. He wasn't Italian, but he was a genius when it came to math, numbers. From there, the money would be wired to the International Credit Bank in Geneva, Switzerland. You can see what's happening. They're laundering the money. And then it would be wired to a Banco Internacional in Mexico City. from which into an account owned by Manuel Aguario. That is a name you need to remember. This is an attorney down there who's obviously a CIA asset. They put the money in his account, and from that bank and from that account, they would pay these Watergate burglars uh, in 72. But before that, they would pay the assassins in 1960 through 63. Now, the reason I mentioned the Watergate burglars because this is what busted or potentially could have busted the Watergate scandal wide open is when they got checks to this bank on this exact same account that the FBI, the #2 FBI guy, we know him as Deep Throat, wanted to go to Mexico City and investigate this bank, investigate this account because they had a check from one of the burglars' pockets that tied to that bank. And Nixon was scared to death that an investigation of that account and that bank, obviously it already ties them to the Watergate burglary, but what else would it tie them to? And going all the way back to 60, if you dug far enough, you were going to find that it was paying an assassination team, a hit team that was training in Mexico, being paid by the same bank, the same account. The money coming from the same people. So it instantly would have tied Watergate to the assassination team of 1960. Just another link, right? We've already seen several links, but it would be another one. That's what Nixon was scared to death of, which is why he went to the FBI and said, you need, or went to the CIA and said, you need to tell the FBI to back off. And we have, that was on the tapes, in his own words, because Nixon's putting these pieces together in his mind. Remember now, Nixon's out of government at this point. He lost the election. So he's now lost control of this assassination team and all these, the 5412 committees, lost control of all the covert operations. He's on the outside looking at. That doesn't mean it all stopped. And that doesn't mean that Kennedy's in control, new president. He didn't even know about the S-Force. He doesn't even know. They didn't tell him. So it's interesting where this is headed. But anyway, this money from this bank account, after it's been laundered through, been sent from Las Vegas to New Orleans to Miami, and it's sent over to Switzerland and back to Mexico. It's successfully been laundered, and now that's who's paying from that account, from that bank. That's what's paying this S-Force to carry out this work, to carry out this. And it's not just paying the assassins, it's paying the CIA trainers, the Rip Robertson, Carl Jenkins. I'm sure there's probably some payment to Clint Murchison to use his ranch, et cetera, et cetera. That's where all the money's coming from. Remember what they said in the Watergate investigation? Follow the money, follow the money, follow the money. And that was the advice that Deep Throat gave Woodward and Bernstein. Follow the money. You follow the money, it's not just going to lead you to the culprits responsible for Watergate. It's also going to lead you somewhere else. And they're going to move heaven and earth trying to prevent you from going to that other place. They'll give you Watergate, and I can give you the other. Anyway, the plausible deniability that the CIA is so good at has been, if you look at this whole operation, the way it's set up, the CIA is covered. Nixon is covered because he's a classified member of the 5412 committee. He's the chairperson, which of course that means the operation is covered because it's a covert operation of the 5412 committee, which itself is classified. So it means no one is ever going to know about the operation because no one knows about the 5412 committee. Kennedy himself just found out, and he's the new president. And of course, nobody knows that the vice president's in charge of it. So they don't know the operation. They don't know the people, the operators. They don't know the committee. Nobody knows anything. The use of Howard Hughes to put all this together, he's a private citizen. He's not government. Mayhew is a private citizen, his attorney. All of these mob bosses, Rosselli, Giancarlo, these are private citizens. They aren't government employees. The money is off the books because it's coming from these private citizens, these private entities, these casinos. The training base is not on a CIA, it's not Langley, it's on a private citizen's ranch. And all the operators are covered because they're classified. That includes E. Howard Hunt, Frank Sturgis, the trainers, Jenkins, Robertson, all 15 assassins. They're all invisible as covert operators under the protective umbrella of the CIA 5412 Committee, which itself is completely classified. This entire operation, if in the eyes of the government, doesn't even exist. The American people don't know. Kennedy, the president of the United States, doesn't know about it. He knows about the 5412 Committee. He has no idea about the S Force and what it's doing. He won't find out about that until 1963. All right. Now that we haven't covered anything yet as far as what the S Force does or carries out. Right now they're just training. But I wanted to tell the story today of its formation and how it's put together, and to show clearly that it was very well thought out to maintain plausible deniability for the CIA. And it's all under the umbrella of this 5412 committee, but it's the brainchild of the chairperson who went past the 5412 committee, who was carrying out its own Operation 40, but it wasn't working fast enough. And he went off the books to private citizens and created his own thing. And then during this period, he's assuming he's going to win the election and can maintain control of this for the next 8 years, but he loses the election and loses control of it. Meanwhile, the new guy comes in, has no knowledge of it, so he has no control over it. And you have, in essence, a rogue operation, a rogue assassination team that is completely off the books and outside. It is totally unaccountable. It doesn't report to anybody, at least not the folks that you would think. It doesn't report to LBJ, the new chairperson of 5412. He doesn't know about the S Force. It doesn't report to Kennedy. He doesn't know about the S Force. It reports to only the folks in the know, which would be Alan Dulles, the director of the CIA. And of course, William Harvey, the assassination expert of the CIA. Those folks are in the know. So that's who is now governing this thing or running this. Nixon's outside of government. He can't control it. Kennedy doesn't know. He can't control what he doesn't know about. LBJ doesn't know. So you have now, in addition to a rogue CIA director, and in addition to a rogue CIA agency itself, you now have a rogue assassination team that is fully constituted of anti-Castro Cubans that hate Castro and anybody who tries to help Castro. And when we get to 1963, they're already mad at Kennedy pretty quickly after he takes office because he failed them at Bay of Pigs. By the time we get to 63, they're going to view Kennedy as the bigger enemy, the bigger problem, the bigger threat than even Castro. And here they have this specialized training in triangular fire, hitting a moving target from distance with high-powered rifles between 3 teams of rifles. And until they can take out Kennedy, who has become this bigger problem, they can't take out the guy they were put together to take out, and that's Castro. So in that context, Dallas makes complete sense. The way the shooting happened, the ballistics, the evidence, shots from 3 directions, moving target, no top removed. The operators who carried it out make perfect sense because of this training and this assassination team that nobody has control over. It's okay. I told you that I would tell you the source on this. It's actually 2 people. Let me tell you the story quickly. His name is Daniel Sheehan. Daniel Sheehan is a longtime civil rights attorney. In 1960, or in the early 1970s, He was working for F. Lee Bailey's law firm in I think it was in Boston. Pretty sure it was in Boston. And that their firm was called in to represent James McCord as one of the Watergate burglars. And in trying to get the story about what happened at Watergate so they could represent their client, they went to another client of theirs who had inside information about some of these Cubans who had been arrested. I gave you the list of those 3 Cubans that were arrested at Watergate, and they came from Miami. And their other client's name was Santos Trafficante. And they said, if anybody knows who these 3 guys are, it's Santos Trafficante, because they're his guys. So they sat Santos down. They said, tell us about these 3 guys and how they relate to Watergate. They're your people. How'd they get mixed up in this? And he said, well, as long as we have attorney-client privilege, I can tell you the story. It's much bigger than what you think it is. And so they had the attorney-client privilege, and he tells the assembled attorneys, including Daniel Sheehan, the whole story about the creation of the S-Force. And there's more to the story, obviously, that I'm going to share as we go forward. But he says, these people were recruited. I was approached by Sam Gene Kahn, Johnny Rosselli, and Sheffield Edwards, who was representing Nixon, to put this assassination team together. And the question was, well, what were they trying? What was their goal? Well, their goal was to assassinate Castro. By the time we get to 63, no one's in charge of them. And according to Santos Trafficante, they were the ones who assassinated JFK. And as such, when Nixon came into power in 68 and was having trouble getting the FBI to stop the leaks that were coming out of the White House and ended up in the front pages of the New York Times, the Pentagon Papers, and all that stuff, he put together his own plumbers unit, and he was in the to stop the leaks. That's why they're called the plumbers. And in the course of putting together this plumbers unit to carry out these covert ops to stop the leaks, he hired E. Howard Hunt, and you saw it. And of course, E. Howard Hunt brought with him all these other covert operators that he had experience with prior, they'd been working as a team, doing all these covert ops during the 50s and 60s. So he just brought the people he trusted into the operation, and it became a sort of a replay of the S-Force. He sort of put the band back together, is what he did, to carry out the Watergate break-in. But they were carrying out all kinds of covert operations on behalf of the 72 the committee to re-elect the president in 72. They were carrying out all kinds of covert operations. It wasn't just Watergate. That's the one they got caught at. And the reason it was E. Howard Hunt and these 3 Cubans and Frank Sturgis was because when E. Howard Hunt recruited for the purposes of creating this new plumbers unit, covert operators, he went back and recruited the people he trusted. They just get recycled. It's like Operation 40 was put together. Then when the S-Force was created, they recycled 15 of those Operation 40 guys into this new assassination team. And then 12 years later, they get recycled again into this plumbers unit to carry out off the books operations for the White House. It's all these same operators, these same people. And so when the lawyers are asking about James McCord and these connections, these Cubans, what Santos is telling them is these are the same guys that are now sitting in a jail because of Watergate. These are the same guys that assassinated JFK in 1963. The same guys that I recruited onto the S-Force in 1960. The same guys that your government recruited into Operation 40 back in 59. It's the same guys. That's why I say, I maintained so many times, a thorough investigation of Watergate could have uncovered the culprits who was behind the assassination of JFK in 63. That would have been truly a bombshell. But instead, everybody was in such a uh, tizzy to get Nixon, that they stopped when they had enough evidence to impeach Nixon. Instead of pursuing it further and going, following the leads all the way back to 60, they stopped when they had enough evidence to get Nixon. People talk about Woodward and Bernstein like they're heroes. The Deep Throat kept telling them, follow the money, follow the money, follow the money. If they had truly followed the money, instead of just getting Nixon and exposing the plot to Nixon's White House to cover up Watergate, it would have uncovered this trail of money that led back to that same bank in Mexico City was paying the assassins back in 1960. And if you start to examine that assassination team, that leads you right to 1963 in Dallas. My God, what a story that would be. But they stopped. They all stopped. And I don't think it's coincidental that Woodward was former ONI. There's that old saying, once ONI, always ONI. It's Office of Naval Intelligence. He was put into that story purposely to tie it off and prevent it from going any further than Nixon. And of course, part of that plot was to make sure there was never a trial of Nixon, whether an impeachment trial in the Senate or as a private citizen, a criminal trial. Either one, a good defense attorney would have unwound the conspiracy all the way back to 60. And so how'd they do that? They convinced Nixon to resign to preserve his pension. And into his place was put Gerald Ford. At their recommendation, Nixon picked him to be his VP. And Gerald Ford was deep state. Gerald Ford was part of the Warren Commission. Gerald Ford was part of the cover up back in 63. They knew he would cover up again. He'd already done it once. And what's the first thing he does? He pardons Nixon. By him resigning, he gets out of the impeachment trial. And then 30 days after he resigned, Gerald Ford pardoned him so that there can never be any criminal trial. And voila, just like in 63, the JFK assassination, no trial by killing Lee Harvey Oswald. Now, by convincing Nixon to resign and pardoning him 30 days later, there's no trial of Nixon, no trial in Watergate, except of the underlings, right? The folks that you can sacrifice. But no trial of Nixon, which would have uncovered things going all the way back to 1959. Probably further, because he was in charge of all the covert operations during the 50s. You talk about a rat's nest. So I say two sources. Santos Tropicante tells the story under the guise of attorney-client privilege. Daniel Sheehan is in that room when Santos Tropicante is telling the story. He's representing James McCord, one of the Watergate clients. That's how Daniel Sheehan came to know this story and about this assassination team. You say, well, you're putting a lot of faith in Santos Tropicante. Santos Tropicante had no reason to lie. He knew the names, and through independent corroboration, we're able to put these people in places that corroborate the story. He just gave us the rough outline. And then researchers have been able to plug that out, plug into it other facts that they've researched and learned about this assassination conspiracy going from other source, plug that into that rough framework, and you add Marita Lorenz's story into, and it all makes sense. And it all points to a CIA conspiracy, a rogue agency led by a rogue director that is training a rogue group of assassins that all converge in 1963 in Dallas and then get recycled time and time again. And we find out about it in 1974 as a result of Watergate investigation. But we'll get to that, and we'll tell the story how the Watergate investigators dropped the ball and really could have uncovered a massive scandal rather than, Watergate, small potatoes compared to the assassination of a president. It's a big deal, but it's not comparable. Okay, I've gone on and on. It's a fascinating story. This will be my video for the week. Probably I may not do a second one because this is so long. But anyway, I appreciate you hanging in there, and check out Daniel Sheehan's work. He's still alive, He's all over YouTube, and he travels around the country. He's been involved in major casework around the country. Very prominent civil rights attorney. You may not agree with his politics, but when it comes to his knowledge of the inner workings of government, the man he's like Forrest Gump. He's been some places and on the front lines of some pretty major events. So check him out, Daniel Sheehan. He does. He's, so far as I know, he was the first person to ever offer a college class or credit on the JFK assassination. Now that may not be true anymore, but as far as him being the only one that offers that now, but at the time he was the first. So and some of the classwork is free. You can get access to it on YouTube. He offers through his institute access to some of his lectures. He speaks publicly. He's written a bunch of books, and he tells this story better than I could ever tell it. I hope I did him justice. But anyway, thanks for listening. Feel free to subscribe to the channel. Feel free to smash the like button and share and comment. Until next time, God bless. Thank you.